Look at Australia from space at night. The coastline is on fire with light. Sydney, Melbourne, Brisbane, Perth. A glowing ring pressed hard against the edges of the continent, as if the entire population is clinging to the shore for dear life. And then, in the middle, nothing. An area the size of Western Europe sits in almost complete darkness. No cities, no towns, no light at all. This isn't a developing country. This isn't an uninhabited wasteland no one has ever found. This is one of the wealthiest nations on Earth, with a modern government, advanced infrastructure, and vast natural resources buried beneath its soil. And yet 95% of it is essentially empty. The question is not whether people have tried to live there. They have. Thousands of times. Towns were built, farms were planted, families moved inland with ambition and hope. The question is why every single one of those attempts ended the same way, with people leaving in a hurry, abandoning furniture, tools, entire buildings, as if something invisible was driving them out. Today, we are going to drive straight through the heart of this silence and find out exactly what that something is. Australia is the 6th largest country on the planet by total area. It covers more than 7.6 million square kilometers. To put that in perspective, the entire continent of Europe, from Portugal to the Russian border, fits comfortably inside Australia's borders, with room to spare. And yet, Australia's total population is around 26 million people. That is roughly the same as the city of Shanghai. All of them packed onto a narrow coastal strip that makes up perhaps 5% of the land. On paper, this looks like a planning problem. Surely a country that rich, that modern, that organized could simply build roads, lay rail lines, dig wells, and spread its population more evenly across the land. Other countries have done it. The American West was settled. Siberia was populated. The Canadian prairies were farmed. So why not here? The answer is that Australia spent the better part of 150 years trying to do exactly that. And 150 years of failure is not bad luck. It is the land telling you something. There is one road that connects the south of Australia to the north. It is called the Stuart Highway, and it runs for 3,000 kilometers from Adelaide to Darwin, cutting straight through the geographic center of the continent. It is the spine of the Outback, and if you drive it, you will understand everything. For the first few hours out of Adelaide, the landscape looks normal. Vineyards, farms, low green hills, towns with petrol stations and cafes and people going about their day. But the green fades quickly, the hills flatten out, the trees get smaller, then scrappier, then disappear entirely. And then there is just the road, a gray ribbon thrown across an ocean of red dust that stretches to every horizon without interruption. You can drive for 3 hours without seeing another vehicle. Not a slow period, not an early morning lull. 3 hours, nothing. And when something does appear, it is often not a car but a wild camel standing on the verge, staring at you with complete indifference. There are an estimated 300,000 feral camels wandering the Australian interior right now. They were brought here in the 19th century to carry supplies for inland expeditions. They escaped, multiplied, and now they outnumber the human population of the Outback by a significant margin. Even the animals that were imported to serve humans eventually chose the wilderness over human company. Along the roadside, old telegraph poles lean at awkward angles. Many collapsed entirely. These were the first communications infrastructure built to connect the interior with the outside world. The line was completed in 1872. It was a staggering engineering achievement for its time, and it connected a string of outpost towns that most people today have never heard of, because most of those towns no longer exist. Road signs still point to them. You will see a sign for Farina, and you will follow the dirt track, and you will find stone walls with no roofs, door frames standing over empty ground, the rusted skeleton of a water pump slowly dissolving into the red earth. People built this place. They made walls from local limestone. They planted gardens. They had a pub, a post office, a railway station. They had plans. The rains came for a few years, and then the rain stopped, and within a generation the town was gone. This is not an isolated case. There are hundreds of these places scattered across central Australia. Each one is a monument to the same stubborn idea that this land could be tamed, and to the same brutal outcome. Most people, looking at a map, assume Australia is empty simply because it is dry. That is true, but it is only the surface of a much deeper problem. To understand what is really happening here, you have to go back hundreds of millions of years. Australia is the oldest continent on Earth. It has not experienced a major geological upheaval. a volcanic eruption, a glacial period, a mountain-building event, for an almost incomprehensible length of time. On other continents, geological activity never stops refreshing the soil. Volcanoes spread mineral-rich ash across the landscape. Glaciers grind mountains into powder and deposit it as rich, fertile silt across the plains below. Rivers carry nutrients from young, active mountain ranges down to the lowlands, fertilizing everything in their path. None of that happens in Australia. Geologists describe this continent as tectonically dead. The ancient mountains have been worn to stumps. There are no active volcanoes. There have been no glaciers for tens of millions of years. The result is that Australian soil has been sitting here, exposed to sun and rain, slowly losing its minerals for so long that in much of the interior, it has been stripped of almost everything a plant needs to grow. No phosphorus, no nitrogen, no potassium. The red color of the Outback soil is actually rust. Oxidized iron, because even the useful minerals have been broken down into forms that plants cannot absorb. You can pour water on this ground and it will not bloom. There is nothing in it to bloom with. And then there is the rain shadow. Along the entire eastern coast of Australia runs a mountain range called the Great Dividing Range. It is not especially tall, but it is perfectly positioned. Moisture-laden clouds roll in off the Pacific Ocean, hit the mountains, rise up, cool down, and drop their rain on the eastern slopes and the narrow coastal strip. Sydney gets over a meter of rainfall per year. Melbourne is lush and green. Brisbane is subtropical and fertile, but when those clouds cross the ridge and descend on the other side, they have already lost their moisture. They arrive in the interior as dry, hot air that evaporates 10 times more water than it deposits. The mountains do not just fail to share the rain with the interior, they actively steal it. The result is a climate trap from which there is no escape. Even when rain does fall in Central Australia, it disappears almost immediately, absorbed into the ancient, exhausted soil, or evaporated by temperatures that regularly exceed 50 degrees on the surface. Riverbeds that look like roads in summer run as flash floods for a few hours after rain, then vanish completely before they can recharge any aquifer or irrigate any field. And then, sitting over all of this like a malevolent god, is El Niño. The Australian climate is shaped more than any other on Earth by a cyclical ocean temperature pattern in the Pacific that oscillates between two extreme states. In one phase, it delivers catastrophic droughts that can last 5 or 10 years, years in which not a drop of useful rain falls, livestock die in their thousands, topsoil blows away in red storms visible from space. In the other phase, the same land is inundated by floods so total that roads disappear, paddocks become lakes, and towns are cut off for weeks. The floods don't help because the water arrives too fast on dead soil to do anything useful. It rushes across the surface and vanishes into salt pans, carrying the last traces of topsoil with it. A farmer elsewhere can plan for the weather. They cannot predict it perfectly, but they understand the seasons. A farmer in Central Australia cannot plan for anything. The only certainty is that at some point, something catastrophic will happen. The only question is whether this decade brings the drought or the flood. No modern economy can be built on that foundation. No bank will lend to a farmer whose farm might not exist in 5 years. No family will raise children somewhere that a decade-long drought can render uninhabitable without warning. The tragedy is not that people never tried. It is that governments spent over a century actively encouraging them to try, with policies designed to turn the Outback into productive farmland, and families paid the price for decisions made by planners who had never spent a summer inland. Throughout the late 19th and early 20th centuries, the Australian government offered land grants, railway connections, and financial incentives to anyone willing to move into the interior. A string of new towns appeared along the transcontinental rail lines. Farina, Marie, Udnadada, Inaminka. Settlers arrived, built homes from the local stone because there was no timber, planted crops, and waited for the rain that the government's brochures had promised was coming. For a few years in a good cycle, it worked. Crops grew, cattle fattened, towns developed a kind of rough prosperity. And then the cycle turned. When the drought came, and it always came, it did not come gradually. The grass simply stopped growing. The water holes dried from the bottom up. Livestock died faster than they could be sold. Families who had invested everything they owned into land, equipment, and livestock watched it all turn to dust. The cost of staying, of trying to buy water and feed trucked in from hundreds of kilometers away, quickly exceeded any possible return. And so people left. Sometimes in an organized way, sometimes in a desperate rush, sometimes leaving behind everything that could not be loaded onto a cart. The stone walls stayed. The iron roofs stayed. The water pumps and the broken machinery and the family photographs nailed to walls that would never again have a family living behind them. All of it stayed. Today, those ruins are a tourism attraction. Visitors drive out to photograph the ghost towns and marvel at the courage of the people who once lived there. But what those ruins actually represent is a policy failure of enormous scale. A century of governments telling people that the land could support them, knowing on some level that it probably couldn't. The few communities that have survived in the deep interior have done so only by accepting a fundamental truth: they are not self-sufficient and they never will be. Coober Pedy, the famous opal mining town 850 kilometers north of Adelaide, has chosen to build its homes underground to escape the heat. It relies entirely on road trains for every liter of water, every kilogram of food, every piece of building material it uses. It is less a town than a very expensive outpost, kept alive by constant resupply from the coast. If the truck stopped running for 2 weeks, Coober Pedy would become uninhabitable. That is what life in the Australian interior actually means. Not rugged self-reliance, not frontier independence, a complete and permanent dependence on supply lines that stretch for hundreds of kilometers across hostile terrain, where a single flood event can cut a community off entirely, and where the cost of everything, electricity, water, food, medical care, is several times what it costs on the coast. When you understand that, the satellite image of Australia at night stops being a mystery. It becomes obvious. The ring of light along the coast is not where people chose to live. It is where the continent allowed people to live. The interior of Australia is not a blank space on the map waiting to be filled in. It is a space that has been visited, surveyed, settled, farmed, mined, and abandoned over and over again for 150 years. The ghost towns along the Stuart Highway are not evidence of a frontier that hasn't been reached yet. They are evidence of a frontier that was reached, and that pushed back. The ancient soil has no nutrients left to give. The Great Dividing Range ensures the rain never arrives. El Niño makes even planning impossible. And underneath the Red Desert, the vast underground reservoir that colonial settlers once hoped would irrigate the continent arrives at the surface boiling hot and loaded with salt. A mirror image of the promises made about this land, generous on the surface, unworkable in reality. Other continents were tamed by geography that eventually yielded to human persistence. Australia has a different kind of geography, one that doesn't yield, one that simply waits. The interior isn't undiscovered. It isn't undeveloped. It was tried. It was tested across generations and at enormous human cost. And it was rejected, not by the people who live there, but by the land itself. If you want to be the first to hear about the hidden mechanisms that shape the world around us, subscribe to the channel and hit the bell. Our next journey starts very soon.